Okay, so I didn't want to come here today and simply regurgitate facts about curriculum development and program delivery. I really wanted to bring something a little bit more personal. I wanted to bring something that said something about who I am as a person and what I try to do in the classroom. So today I'm going to speak to you a little bit about helping students develop personal narratives that are stable enough to be resilient, but at the same time malleable enough to foster continual intellectual, spiritual, and emotional growth. I know it's a mouthful, but I'm going to take you through it. It's okay. Okay, so when I started this topic, I started to look at what other people had to say about narratives, both collective and personal. I looked at what Adichie had to say about a unified African narrative, and I listened to a guy named Cowan speak about the danger of the persuasive power of narratives. And I listened to a lot of other speakers, but what really got to me was that all of these speakers seemed to position themselves within their narratives in a fairly safe identity space where they could alter their narrative with some authority. Even Adichie, who expressed some sort of she was uncomfortable about the collective African narrative because she felt that it was based on the assumption that Africa was one country, one culture, one set of beliefs. Even she was able to place herself within that narrative and change the trajectory of the misunderstandings in the discourse surrounding that narrative. I felt really lost. Because you see, my blood is Chinese and Portuguese and German. And I was born in Trinidad into a predominantly black and Indian and Chinese culture. And then I moved to Canada when I was 12. I had a fairly typical North American teenage upbringing. Then I moved to Cyprus later on. I learned Greek. I'm neither Cypriot nor Greek. How could I stand here and speak with any authority about narratives when I didn't feel secure in my position? Now, my argument is that as the world gets more interconnected and migration becomes easier, there will be more people like me with these personal narratives that are built out of bits and pieces. And our future narratives will actually be all of these personal narratives coming together in a tapestry, forming these larger narratives. And it's not going to be like the homophonous narratives of the past, those big narratives of man and woman. I mean, even now, those larger narratives that are being questioned and changed by smaller narratives, like by trans people and intersex people, they're entering that debate and changing those narratives. Okay? So, along with all of those narratives that define us as a person, included in that are our personal narratives about who we are as a learner. I'm going to take you through a really quick activity. Okay, put your hands up like this. The easy movement is to go like this. You have one hand following the other. Okay? Now, what I want to try to do, I want you to try to move one in one direction and move the other one in the other direction. Okay. It's a funny little trick, I know. Now, we're going to get a little metacognitive about this, and I want you to think about what your approach to this was. Some of you are immediately very keen and wonderful, and you're like, oh yeah, I can do this. This is easy, right? Okay. And then there are the people who couldn't quite do it, and the thoughts going through those people's minds were, some of them probably thought, I can't do this now, but with a little bit of practice, I can do this later on. So get back to me tomorrow, and I'll really impress you. Okay. And then there were other people who kind of said, this is stupid. Why am I doing this? Okay, and that really says a lot about what your personal narrative around learning is. It really allows you to see what you think of yourself as a learner. Okay? Now, we think of things like personal educational narratives of people like Einstein, who we know had trouble at school. I like to think that he was probably one of those students who, when he was given a new skill to try, probably went back and said, I don't quite get it now, but let me practice a bit, go home, and I'll really impress you tomorrow. Okay? You have these personal educational narratives of these wonderful people. And I don't know what caused me to wake up in the middle of the night and do this. But my personal educational narrative said, that's really interesting. Maybe you can take that and use that maybe in a talk someday. But for whatever reason, I hung on to it. And I like to think that Einstein did similar things. When he woke up in the middle of the night and he had these strange ideas, he didn't just say, oh, that's stupid, I'm going to throw that out. He kind of said, I'm going to look at it a little bit more to see if there's anything to it. This may just be a fun party trick, but maybe there's something more to it. And thinkers like that really shape the way that all of us view the universe today. So it's really important for us to help kids develop a personal narrative, educational narrative especially, that helps them to continue growing and not just throw things out because they think it's stupid or they think it's not going to get them that law degree, it's not going to get them into med school. You know, they need to entertain ideas, they need to question things, they need to work on things. So I don't know if it was divine or extraterrestrial intervention that caused me to do that. And, you know, sometimes I lump extraterrestrials and the divine into sort of a similar narrative. Because when I was a kid, I know, it's like it's humanoids with golden tiaras being, you know, pulled up in large columns of light, and it's, you know, ascensions. When I was a kid, you know, I had all of these fairy stories and folktales and, you know, mythologies that I really believed to be true. A lot of kids, when they're quite young, will be able to take you through their favorite story and recite the whole thing, and they'll tell it over and over and over again to other people, to themselves, until eventually they start to internalize that story, and it becomes a part of who they are. It's the same thing with our educational narratives and with our personal narratives. We tell those stories that we hear over and over again, and they might be, you know, really beneficial narratives, and sometimes they're, you know, narratives about I'm fat, or, you know, I'm ugly, or I'm just not that intelligent. Okay? But we say them over and over again, and we internalize them. And, you know, I believed everything I read up to a certain point. But then the adults in my life started telling me sort of conflicting information. You know, they'd come to me and say, you know that story that you read about the little girl running away from the wolves? Seemed completely plausible to me. That story's fictional, completely fictional. You shouldn't believe that. And then I had another adult come to me and say, the story about the guy who turns wine into water at weddings and raises people from the dead, that's true. You should believe that. And then, you know, I went along a little further, and Obi-Wan Kenobi died and you know, guided Luke Skywalker through life. And no, the completely fictional, don't believe that. It's just, you know, something that happens in the movies. And yet, another adult would come along and say, you know, my father, who died when I was very young, guides me through life, and that's very true. So then I started to think, okay, well, every piece of writing I needed to approach with a sort of critical eye, and I needed to approach each piece of writing as a piece of fiction, and I really needed to analyze it. And that's a really useful skill for kids to have. I mean, to go through and approach these things with a critical eye, and to question things as they go through life. And those narratives that they tell themselves over and over and over again, to question, why am I still telling this narrative? Why is it so frequent in our society? And I'm bringing this up, and I'm fully aware of the ramifications, but we look at things like the Holocaust, and we have fictional and factual accounts, narratives about the Holocaust. I mean, the Holocaust appears in an X-Men film where Magneto spends time in a concentration camp. And, you know, these narratives are told over and over and over to remind us of things that have happened. And then, you know, things like the Rwandan genocide in Darfur, the narratives surrounding those kinds of things are left out. They're not told as often. It's really important for us to remember, you know, these sorts of narratives, especially the ones that we have emotional connections to. Because it's very difficult for us to break away from the emotional connection to those narratives in order to look at them critically for what they are. Joseph Campbell and other theorists in the field have looked at narratives. And, you know, Joseph Campbell's hero's journey and that kind of thing have given us a way to analyze what narratives are. One of my favorite theorists that I read when I was quite young was Vladimir Prop. What he did was he gathered a bunch of narratives together, folk tales. And here's an excerpt from his book, The Morphology of the Folktale. And what he's done here is he's taken all of the events in the narratives and giving them alphanumeric signifiers. So aside from seeing that at least in one of his stories, somebody had to attempt to gnaw through a tree, we see that, he's starting to separate all of the emotional attachment that we have to the narratives. And by the end of it, his narratives kind of look like this, almost like algebraic equations. When we take the emotional part out of it, and we see things as just a sequence of events that are happening, it's really easy for us to suddenly say, why can't we move those parts around? Why can't we just substitute things, And suddenly, we can do that in our lives. Instead of writing, after the death of a loved one, I will persever on that death. We can write, after the death of a loved one, I will go on a healing journey of renewal. Instead of saying, the hero encounters an insurmountable wall, we can say the hero encounters a fence, or the hero finds a hole in the wall to crawl through, or the hero decides that the wall actually isn't in his way, so he's going to go that way. Whatever the case, when we look at the events in our lives and the things that we choose to tell ourselves over and over again, if we break away from the emotional attachment, we can sort of rearrange things and take a different perspective of things. If we look at people like Marie Curie, and, if she'd just taken her narrative the way it was, she was told, she's a woman, we may not have had some of the breakthroughs that we have today. And connecting it further with education, there's a fairly well-known developmental psychologist named Gray, and his studies are now linking waning resilience in young adults, especially at a university level, with helicopter societies and helicopter parenting. And basically, people who've been scheduling their kids into activity after activity with very little choice in the matter. And my reading of this is that basically what we're doing is giving kids a set narrative to follow and not giving them any options to substitute into that, which means that they're only set to become university professors, or they're only set to become, doctors and lawyers. And they're not even aware of all of the options that are available to them. And I think that's really part of our job as teachers, to show them all of these options. I really love drama, because it gives kids the opportunity to try on different roles and examine different characters and move out of their comfort zone and see the realities that exist for people from different cultures and different socioeconomic demographics. And it allows them to see all of the options that they can be swapping into their lives. If Stephen Hawking had taken the narrative he'd been given, we may not have had all of the things that we have today, all of the breakthroughs in science. If he just, settled on, you are a person who, with limited mobility, this is your narrative in life, we wouldn't have had we wouldn't have had the view of the universe that we have today. Okay, so moving on to my last quote. This is from Derek Walcott. Derek Walcott is a Nobel Prize winner from the Caribbean. And he says this about basically the art from the Caribbean. He says, break a vase and the love that reassembles the fragments is stronger than that love which took its symmetry for granted when it was whole. The glue that fits the pieces is the sealing of its original shape. It is such a love that reassembles our African and Asiatic fragments, the cracked heirlooms whose restoration shows its white scars. This gathering of broken pieces is the care and pain of the Antilles, and if the pieces are disparate, ill-fitting, they contain more pain than their original sculpture, those icons and sacred vessels taken for granted in their ancestral places. Antillean art is this restoration of our shattered histories, our shards of vocabulary, our archipelago becoming a synonym for pieces broken off from the original continent. my reading of this is that our narratives become our art made manifest through our flesh. We become our narratives. Now, some of you may take some of this home and repeat the story over and over again to people. Great. Some of you may not have made any emotional connection to this talk whatsoever, and that's fine as well. Because, like I tell my kids, I'm here just to give you options. At the end of the day, it's your narrative, and even though people around you can influence it, they're not the ones writing it. So get out there and continue writing.